Hey everyone, I'm Cosmic and welcome to the Cloud. About a week ago, we finally got the release of Splatoon Raiders. As of writing this, I haven't 100%ed every single thing the game has to offer, but I have seen basically all of the gameplay, lore, and character moments. I definitely want to talk about Raiders in much greater and more spoilery detail sometime soon, but as many people don't even have the Switch 2 yet, or maybe on the fence about this game, I thought it might be nice to just get out a quick video to give some of my impressions after rolling credits. Of course, I am a massive Splatoon fan and very heavily biased, so this will not be an objective review of the game as much as sharing my own thoughts and reactions. Let's get into it. First of all, I would like to give a bit of a frame of reference for my feelings going into the game. I am someone who actually doesn't love Salmon Run nearly as much as other Splatoon fans. I still find it fun, and the lore is very interesting, but of the PvP, Hero Mode, and Salmon Run trifecta, it has always been my least favorite part of the Splatoon experience, both in terms of gameplay and aesthetics. What I honestly find more relevant to the discussion, though, is Splatoon 3 Side Order, as it featured single-player gameplay against hordes of enemies on small arenas and incremental weapon and character upgrades. My opinion of Side Order has honestly dwindled with time. I am a bit of a defender of what it was trying to do with its characters and lore, but if the goal of the DLC was to be an endlessly replayable roguelite Splatoon game, I would say it failed on multiple fronts. Beyond the common complaints of minimal content, underwhelming story, and repetition, I also just never really loved the combat against gelatins. Playing runs at full strength on a 100%ed save file honestly isn't that fun because of how overpowered you get. This led many players to do challenge runs, such as refusing to use the permanent hack upgrades. The game itself actually encourages you to do so to get the story's true ending. However, to me, this felt like the opposite extreme, where the game became incredibly punishing for the smallest of mistakes. If you weren't constantly focusing, you could get cornered, have basically no options for escape, die, and get sent back to floor 1, which just didn't feel good. Obviously, your mileage may vary here. I think roguelites are just not for me, but it was surprising how often my deaths felt kind of unfair. My personal favorite Splatoon gameplay has always been the puzzle platforming found in the first 3 Splatoon campaigns, and going into Raiders, there wasn't much sign of that at all. So while I was of course excited about a Splatoon spin-off game, I had a lot of worries going in. And I would just like to say, without any spoilers, that those fears did not come true. Splatoon Raiders is amazing. I genuinely feel like it solved all of the issues I had with the gameplay flow of Salmon Run and the difficulty of Side Order, while also incorporating tons of really cool level design with interesting new movement and tools for exploration. For the first time since 2018, a Splatoon game blew my expectations out of the water, and I am so happy to be able to say that. There's so much nostalgia and sentimentality I hold for the first 3 Splatoon games, to the point that I don't think anything will ever surpass the emotional impact of Octo Expansion, but this is easily the best Splatoon game since Octo Expansion, and I wouldn't blame someone for arguing that Raiders has the better gameplay of the two. Unlike Side Order, whose ending felt abrupt and somewhat empty, and obviously Return of the Mammalians, I can say confidently, without any major caveats, that Raiders is a really good video game. If you're someone who is already a Splatoon fan, but you weren't sure about picking this one up, I would absolutely recommend it. For $50 digitally, it is 100% worth your money. The point of this video isn't just to shill for the game, but I really think it is a must-have Splatoon experience. Getting into more detail, let's go over the basic gameplay loop. You start out in the hub area, the Hideout ship. It's a pretty small space, but I was honestly surprised how attached I became to the ship over the course of the game. Between the details scattered across each of the rooms, to the view of the islands in the distance, and the different dialogue and animations you can get from Shiver, Fry, and Big Man, it ends up feeling really cozy. You can also upgrade the ship throughout the game, which helps with the sense of progression and feeling of ownership over the base. This is where you upgrade all of your gear, and there is a lot of stuff to upgrade. upgrade. I was honestly worried it would get a bit overwhelming, but the game is good about pushing you little reminders of things you haven't checked on in a while, like if you have unused skill points or available gadget slots. It ends up feeling like just the right amount of control, where it's easy to keep track of what you're working towards, and most of the upgrades actually feel meaningful. The different types of upgrades and collectibles are handled by different characters, which not only helps to make Deep Cut feel like they're actually contributing, but also makes it easier to remember the different options at your disposal. I also like that, in classic Splatoon hub style, you can manually walk to each of the different upgrade areas, or just use the menu to quickly swap between them. Overall, the Hideout ship is handled pretty flawlessly. I honestly have no complaints. Next, you access the map screen and select a raid. Raids are the game's levels, consisting of 5 main types. First are the linear levels, where the goal is to follow the blue beacons and mine the 3 spiral-like deposits they mark. Guarding each crystal is a horde of Salmonids that have to be defeated before you can claim the treasure. Between the crystals, you'll find gameplay reminiscent of previous Splatoon campaigns. However, these levels are all properly integrated into the setting. The tropical island levels are built out of rounded, sandy hills, the volcanic levels feature jagged rocks, and so on. This alone has a pretty significant impact on how the gameplay is designed, with many instances of the game using the environment as a part of the level. For example, you might have to use the bot hop to reach a platform on the side of a cliff, or a secret might be hidden around a corner at the edge of the water, or a powerful jet of air might launch you from one island to another. There are honestly better examples I could use, but I'm trying my best not to spoil some of the cooler moments the game has to offer. This all might seem kind of basic, but it's a pretty distinct shift in design for the Splatoon series, and I personally found it really refreshing. Now, I wouldn't say the game ever pushes the platforming to the extremes of Octo Valley or Canyon, but I found myself pleasantly surprised at how engaging it was to move throughout these levels. These stages still have that back and forth balance of combat and movement that Splatoon has always relied on, but with a much greater sense of immersion and physical interaction with the environment than ever before. The second type of raid involves exploring an open-ended environment. Here, you must battle with Salmonids and collect power eggs in order to mine a single giant crystal at the level's entrance. In my opinion, these raids are fantastic and some of my absolute favorite parts of the game. The only downside is that there aren't that many of them, but each one could take a good amount of time to complete. These are the biggest, most immersive areas we've ever gotten in a single-player Splatoon game, with lots of secrets, nooks and crannies, and unique events that occur during combat. I would genuinely take an entire game of levels just like these. They aren't the most expansive levels in the world, don't get your hopes up for something the size of a Mario Odyssey Kingdom, because it's not that, but it's still kind of shocking to go from what we had in Alterna and Side Order to something like this. And once again, moving around in these levels is fun. Classic Splatoon platforming gimmicks like dash tracks and bounce pads, alongside new elements taking advantage of the game's gliding ability, fill these landscapes with really cool bits of interaction and exploration. Next are the Salmonid dens, which are much more in line with the arenas seen in Side Order. Going into Splatoon Raiders, I expected these to be my least favorite part of the game, and I would say that turned out to be the case. However, that's not to say they aren't fun. I ended up enjoying these way more than I thought I would, and that's mostly due to the amount of options you have at your disposal during combat. More on that later. Notably, rather than attempting to fight enemies while completing some additional objective, like the portals or splat zones in Side Order, the goal of Salmonid dens is simply to defeat the enemies, and collect enough of the power eggs they drop before the time limit runs out. I actually vastly prefer this system. In Side Order, the enemies often felt more like a nuisance than anything, especially on the earlier floors. You didn't actually get anything for killing them, they were basically just there to get in your way. In Raiders, splatting the enemies is the entire point, and because you get EXP for every Salmonid you defeat, it never feels like a waste of time, even if you lose entirely. Additionally, boss Salmonids now drop Mega Power Eggs, which are worth 100 normal eggs. This allows for strategy in how you fight the Salmonids, because just like in Salmon Run, you can use the boss's strengths against them, like exploding a steelhead or triggering a Slammin' Lid to crush a group of enemies. Along with gadgets that allow you to take out enemies and bosses your own way, this leads to an incredibly satisfying loop that surprisingly never got old. The arenas themselves aren't the most inspired. Like Side Order, the terrain here is pretty basic, but you will occasionally see things like dash tracks and rails to spice up the movement. However, the game constantly pits you up against unique combinations of enemies, and you will sometimes get a den that stands out a lot from the rest. Dens are surprisingly varied and consistently difficult, with the game always hovering a couple EXP levels ahead of where the player will probably be. On that note, the game does a good job of giving you multiple options at any time, so if you aren't cut out for a challenge with your current gear, you can pretty much always go somewhere new to level up. Pretty early on in the game, you unlock the option to play previous raids on Spicy mode. In other words, the level terrain will be unchanged, but a greater number of enemies and tougher enemy variants will appear. This genuinely makes for a pretty new and exciting experience every time. I never felt like I was just playing the exact same level again. And even in the cases where it doesn't feel that different, such as doing a spicy raid you're a bit over-leveled for, the stages are just fun enough on their own that I can't say it ever really bothered me. Ruins are another type of raid that are effectively a series of dens, one after another. All 3 sub-levels have to be cleared within 3 lives, or you get sent back to the start. Once again though, EXP is maintained even upon losing, so for the most part you can just keep trying and eventually make your way through, granted you aren't super underleveled. The other main difference is that each ruin ends with a seasoned salmonid. These were teased in the Splatoon Raiders Direct, though there are a few that were not shown off before launch. These are effectively mini-bosses, which is pretty awesome. They are a bit basic, with all but one of them only having a single attack, but considering how much else is going on at the same time, I never really found that to be a concern. Especially because, when you encounter them, the objective changes from collecting power eggs to depleting the seasoned salmonid's health bar. However, Mega Power Eggs are the best way to charge up your Showstopper, which are effectively the special weapons of this game. So the same benefits of the previous gameplay loop continue to apply, only with an additional objective. Defeat lessers and bosses to get Power Eggs, then use those eggs to power up your Showstopper and defeat the seasoned boss. This is really fun, and again, continues to be fun throughout the entire game's runtime. The last type of mission is a sampler dungeon. These are effectively Octo Expansion or Alterna style challenges that give you a specific gadget and ask you to solve puzzles or complete platforming challenges. They partially serve as tutorials for the game's various mechanics, since you can play any of them without actually having crafted the gadget for yourself. Where they really shine though, in my opinion, is when they push the mechanics beyond the ways you would normally use them in combat. There are gadgets I barely used throughout most of the game, but I loved the way they were used in the sampler dungeons to create unique puzzles or more focused bits of platforming. However, they are a bit hit or miss. Some of them are super fun and creative, while others don't really push the idea beyond a simple tutorial. In general, all of them are very short, and aesthetically they kind of blend together. I wouldn't go as far as to say they feel half-baked, but they are kind of the black sheep of Raiders level types. Some are great, some are just okay, but all of them feel a little out of place. I think the game is better off with their inclusion, but they're definitely more of a bonus than a main highlight. And that's the basic loop of Raiders gameplay. Select a raid, collect materials from defeating enemies, head back to the hideout ship, use materials to upgrade gear, repeat. All 5 level types provide a unique experience, taking advantage of the game's mechanics and enemies to craft a wide variety of challenges that stay surprisingly fresh. For me, this system totally worked. I personally would have loved to see more of the open-ended stages, but the amount of content the game provides overall, especially taking into account the unlockable harder difficulties, easily makes this the longest Splatoon single player by far. Personally, I am completely satisfied with the amount and quality of gameplay content in Splatoon Raiders. Gadgets and difficulty. I'll keep this section a bit more brief, as there isn't too much I can say that doesn't just spoil what all of the gadgets are. Gadgets are an essential part of Raiders' core gameplay. At the start of the game, you are given 3 different tanks, labeled Speed, Power, and Tactical. You are also given 3 gadgets, but each one can only be used on its respective tank. This means you're effectively selecting a playstyle, though you can change between tanks at any point between raids. In fact, each tank has its own form of EXP based on how many power eggs you've collected while using it, so you're encouraged to switch between them in order to upgrade your entire arsenal. As you progress, you'll be able to make more gadgets, some of which can be equipped at the same time. Gadgets mainly focus on combat utility, but as you upgrade them using gadget parts, which are found across the game stages, many of them also offer mobility options. To put it simply, these are literal game changers, in the sense that they legitimately alter the way you interact with the game's enemies and level design. Before launch, I saw comparisons being drawn to Side Order's color chips, and while some gadget parts are simple damage buffs, in general, this system is leagues above what side order had to offer. There are parts that change the animation and hitbox of an attack. There are parts that apply status effects to Salmonids. There are parts that multiply the number of projectiles a gadget fires. And notably, the game actually balances around these buffs. At first, you're quite limited in the number of parts you can apply, but as you upgrade your tank, unlock new craftable parts, and collect rare parts, which provide powerful modifications for a lower cost, you can slowly expand the power of your gadgets to match the rising strength of the Salmonids. Here is where I'd like to talk about difficulty, because this is also something I believe Splatoon Raiders completely nails. Again, in side order, the upgrades were both basic, often just increasing the stats of your weapon, while also being broken, as there was basically no cap other than reaching the end of a run. When the game was difficult, such as before acquiring permanent hack upgrades, or when attempting a hackless run, it was largely just because the enemies were incredibly tanky and could easily corner you due to your limited firepower. In Splatoon Raiders, there's actually a selectable difficulty option, chosen at the start of the game, but also with the option to switch it at any point. Importantly, these difficulties do not change the amount of health enemies have, only how much damage they deal. Instead, enemy health is determined by the Salmonid level, which is visible when selecting a raid. Enemy health is also increased in multiplayer. I am so glad this is the case, because what this means is that raiders can continue to provide a genuine challenge while allowing players to take advantage of the vast combat customization the game has to offer. Rather than intentionally limiting yourself to make the game more difficult, players are rewarded for mastering and taking advantage of the multitude of upgrades the game throws their way, which also makes it all the more satisfying to level up and collect materials in the first place. The gameplay loop and difficulty curve feed into one another, keeping the game challenging while also making it rewarding to get stronger. Plus, having all these options at your disposal makes the game significantly less punishing. I personally ran the speed tank for most of the game, and when my armor got broken by a strong enemy, rather than shriveling up and accepting my fate, as was often the case in side order, I could use my gadgets to jump across the map, surround myself with damaging projectiles, and rely on my quick healing relic power to recover. That may sound overpowered, but frankly, it isn't, because it still required awareness of my surroundings, watching my gadget cooldowns to time my escape correctly, and learning from my mistake to take down the boss properly the next time. Awareness and mastery of the game's systems often allowed me to escape dangerous situations through my own expression of skill, and that's super cool. On the topic of difficulty, I think the game does a great job of accounting for all types of players. As a Splatoon veteran, and someone who has been looking for more complexity in the core moveset of a Splatoon game for a long time, I played exclusively on survivalist difficulty, frequently swapping between tanks to experiment with different options. But a brand new player could play on the easier difficulties, allowing them to take significantly more damage, as well as applying gadget parts that automate abilities, so that they can focus on their aim while their sub-weapons fire on their own. There are also perks that cause tank powers to trigger automatically when certain conditions are met. I really just think they struck the perfect balance. It feels like you have so much choice in this game, but it also doesn't feel like you need to obsess over every stat to the point it becomes overwhelming. Raiders is a heavily customizable experience that's not only as hard as you want it to be, but also a game that rewards the players who sink the most time and effort into its systems. I'd like to quickly touch on the game's visuals and music. This is the first Splatoon title to be built for the Nintendo Switch 2, and while it's not the most detailed game I've ever seen, you can definitely tell it takes advantage of the stronger hardware. Some textures are still a bit low res, but the detail and scope of these areas completely make up for it in my opinion. I'm not too much of a snob when it comes to graphics, so I'm mostly comparing this game to what came before in the series, and in that sense, it's pretty much just straight up the best looking Splatoon game. The quality of the art direction is subjective, and it is interesting that they intentionally went for a more subdued look this time around, but I think it fits with the general vibe and tone of the game. My main criticism would have to be that there isn't much variety in the overall theming of the environments. The linear and open-ended levels share a lot of the same textures and background assets, and while specific moments of gameplay help them stand apart, they do look a bit too samey overall. The worst case of this is definitely the sampler dungeons, which is a shame because I think they look great in isolation, but show someone who hasn't played the game 2 levels and they probably think it's the same one. Raiders visuals really shine in the details. The ink effects are fantastic, with some seemingly real-time physics calculations going on to create ripples when each droplet of ink falls to the ground or drips down a wall. The character models are definitely a step up, especially for these salmonid enemies, and it's worth mentioning that a lot of the console's power is likely going toward keeping the game running at a stable 60 while a billion things are happening on the screen. The HUD and menu UI design is also very good. Splatoon rarely misses in this department, but I'm glad to see the upgrade screen still so full of animation and charm. And of course, as this is a spoiler-free video, I can't discuss the game's cutscenes in much detail, but they are the absolute best Splatoon has ever looked in motion. The bosses and finale are fantastic set pieces that genuinely look like the next generation of Splatoon. Music, on the other hand, is a bit more divisive from what I've seen. There are definitely some tracks I really like, such as the songs on the Hideout ship, map screen, certain story moments, and of course everything toward the end of the game. However, Raiders relies a lot more on ambient music that picks up when you enter combat, and some of it is not the most agreeable. I have always said that I have a lot of respect for the music of Salmon Run, for its unique style and instrumentation, but most of it is not something I would listen to outside of the game. And honestly, that's how I feel about a good chunk of Raiders' soundtrack. For an example, the best description I have for the tropical island combat theme is atmospheric noises. It certainly contributes to a unique vibe, but I can't say I really enjoy listening to it. Generally, I would say the music gets better the further you get into the game, and there are some really nice pieces, as well as a couple of bangers, but compared to the immense variety and energy of the mainline Splatoon OSTs, there's not a whole lot here if you aren't into weird fish war chants. I could be convinced that it's an acquired taste, and maybe it will grow on me with time and some more listens, but right now, I could easily say this is my least favorite Splatoon soundtrack. I wouldn't write it off entirely, but if anything was a disappointment in Raiders, for me, it was the music. I obviously can't really talk about the game's story without spoiling anything, but I would just like to say that generally, I liked it. The story presentation is a huge step up, the player character is expressive, and there's a good amount of interesting lore to think about. The scrolls for this game are like really good. Even the ones that I would normally consider to be kind of filler provide some bit of insight into a character or the world, plus a couple that are totally just a joke, but the joke is funny, so I don't care. And the art in the scrolls this time is seriously incredible. Last thing I'll say is that this game did in fact make me like Deep Cut. Shiver, Fry, and Big Men feel way more fleshed out and defined as their own characters, which I was really happy to see. But I think that's where I'll leave it for now. I'll have a lot more to say about this game once I actually finish all the content and edit my entire playthrough, but those are my thoughts for now. I hope you found this interesting, and if you haven't played yet, be careful dodging spoilers in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching. This has been Cosmic, farewell.